Good afternoon, everyone. This is Alan Murabayashi speaking to you from the PhotoShelter World Headquarters here in New York City. Today, we are talking about money, and we have Ilise Benun from Marketing Mentor, one of my good friends, talking to us about this particular issue. And I'm kind of working through some issues with my microphone because I bought this brand new microphone, and when we were audio testing right before we went on, it wasn't working out so well, so I'm back to the headset. So apologies for that. And let me see what's going on here. But in the meantime, hey, Ilise, welcome to the webinar.
Alan.
And
good to be here.
Ilise is fantastic. So she runs a company called Marketing Mentor that provides marketing advice and solution and consulting for what you like to call solopreneurs.
Yes, and the creatively self-employed.
Yep. And you also serve as an advisor / board member for the Freelancers Union.
I am on one of the boards for the Freelancers Union, actually two of their healthcare co-ops.
Which is fantastic. So
Yes,
if you are a freelancer and you're looking for benefits packages or advice or whatnot, freelancersunion.org is great. And the other thing she does is she co-produces a conference called the Creative Freelancersconference.com, which is a fabulous multi-day conference for creatives, whether you're a writer, a photographer, a graphic designer, etc. And this year in San Francisco, from June 22nd through the 24th. And you can get more information at creativefreelancerconference.com. Did I miss anything there?
No, I just would add that if people are interested in an extra discount, they can email me or we can disseminate the discount codes in some way.
Perfect. And I should also mention to you that PhotoShelter has a little contest together called the Jumpstart Contest, which you can learn more about at photoshelter.com/jumpstart. And this contest is really kind of a business contest, and all you need to do is log into your PhotoShelter account, and you can create a free PhotoShelter account, and tell us what you're going to do to improve your business in 2013. And among the $15,000 worth of prizes generously donated by Calumet, you can also have some consulting time from people like Ilise and Zach Arias and Brian Smith and Jasmine DeFore and David Hobby and a whole bunch of great people that are kind of titans in the industry. So we want to thank Ilise for helping us out on that, and also encourage you to check it out at photoshelter.com/jumpstart. But let's dig right in. Ilise, money for creatives is one of the confounding issues. Like, nobody wants to talk about it. And I think there's a tendency for creatives to kind of undervalue what they're doing in a lot of ways. What do you think makes it so difficult for creatives and photographers to kind of talk money with their clients?
You know, one of the things I hear a lot is people tell me that they sometimes can't believe that they would actually get paid well to do something that they love. And because of that, I see them undercharging or not asking for what they should be paid. And I think on top of that is some, I want to call it a fantasy, some belief that if you're creative, you cannot also be a good business person, that those two things either corrupt each other or don't go well together or can't exist side by side.
Yeah, yep, that sounds about right. And if there was sort of one, how do you usually go about changing that mindset for a creative who has that position?
Well, I think, you know, I'm not a psychologist, but there is a huge psychological component here, and just from a behavioral point of view, I would say the first thing is to realize that it's just a belief about oneself, and that is what has to be changed first.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that process is actually the effect of different behaviors practicing something else. So, for example, even in a simple negotiation with a client, you just try something different and see what happens. And if you do it enough and learn from it, I think that's how the changes get made.
Let's go ahead and look at some of these slides that you have together here, finding and qualifying prospective clients. And this is something that you and I have talked about, and we both kind of talk about it when we go out and talk to creatives. This whole idea of identifying the target audience is so crucial into kind of getting the marketing message down correctly, getting the business interchanges correctly. What's your approach to this?
And first, Alan, I think we should apologize, or at least let people know that we're not going to be showing lots of pretty pictures because this is a business focused, not that that can't go along with pretty pictures, but business focused, bulleted presentation. I'm not a designer, I'm a writer. So what we're going to have here are basically just some bullets on the slides, right?
Yep.
I think one of the biggest problems I see with creative professionals, all different kinds, is that first of all, they don't want to focus on the most lucrative work, the most the work that has the most potential to get them doing what they want to be doing and making a living at it. And so that as a result, they take what comes along. And often the jobs that come along, and this has changed a lot, especially with photographers, the jobs that come along aren't paying what they used to. And so all of this together, unless you have a very kind of strategically oriented marketing plan in place, means that you're not qualifying your prospects and you're not finding the prospects who are in the best position to pay you what you need to earn. And so it's kind of a catch-22 because you can't convince the clients who can't pay that they should pay, but you also must find the ones who can pay, and that requires a lot of effort.
So this is this kind of a real kind of Mad Libs almost that you use for your actual clients?
Yes. Yes.
And in when people are starting out and the idea of a bad client when you're kind of scraping to make rent, how do you get around that problem?
Well, and it is very subjective, right? So, and it's kind of like spam. If an email message comes in and it happens to be exactly what you're looking for, then it's not spam. And on another day, it's probably spam.
Right.
So bad clients are that way too, most of them. When you're scraping to make rent, then obviously you have to get yourself in the best position possible and take what comes along. But let's hope that most people are not in that position,
Mm-hmm.
and that they are ready to imagine, basically, to create a picture in their minds of the best possible client, what I would call their ideal client, and not a dreamy one, not like, oh, it would have all of these characteristics, but these people don't exist. You really want to be very clear about who that client is, what they need, and then be able to identify them when you see them. Because if you can't do that by what they say, by what they ask for, by how they treat you, then you are kind of relegated to what I like to call the amateur clients,
Mm-hmm.
which are, not professional clients. They're not people who know how to work with people like you.
And so to kind of further that definition, is the amateur client the type of client who's never paid for the service that you're offering? Is that too much of a simplification?
No, I think often that characteristic qualifies someone as an amateur client,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes they have paid for it, but they just don't value it.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to photography, especially lately, because everyone's got a camera on their phone, then they think they're a photographer suddenly, and very few people can distinguish between mediocre photography and good, excellent photography. And so you have to weed out those people who don't know the difference between what you offer and what they can do themselves.
So that's kind of an interesting take. Instead of trying to educate the amateur client, you just say, hey, I'm not going to waste my time on that client.
It's not always as black and white as that, and I think a lot of people's marketing efforts can be in the service of educating the clients and the prospects, but I would always advise my clients to, instead of trying to persuade someone why they should choose you and pay what you want, to go spend that time finding a much more qualified prospect.
Mm-hmm. So broaching the topic of money,
Yes.
very, very difficult. And as we get to the end of the slide, I also want to ask you about broaching the topic of money when a friend asks you to do some sort of service, even if they say, oh yeah, I definitely want to pay you. Because often what they mean is, I want to pay you, but I want the friends and family discount rate.
Right.
But go ahead and take us through this.
Okay, well, broaching the topic of money, I think number one is the responsibility of the creative professional. And often we wait for the client to bring it up. And so the first suggestion, and it's not on the slide, is you take responsibility. This is what shows that you are the professional. You can say anything like, all right, let's talk about money now. We've talked about all the good things, about all the fun aspects of this project. Let's talk money. And it can be a very simple transition. And, from that point, it really is often a question of stretching yourself outside of your comfort zone because a lot of people don't want to talk about it in the first place. And really, the clients could be just as could be just as nervous about talking money
Hmm.
actually as you are because they may not have a lot of practice at it either.
I definitely agree with that, and oftentimes we've heard other people say, hey, what's your budget for this project, as kind of a first stab into that discussion. What happens when, let's say, someone says, I want you to take some corporate headshots, and you say, hey, what's your budget for this? And they say, oh, I don't know, maybe about $25. When you're thinking more like $500, when it's so out of skew, does that
Mhm.
kind of put them into the amateur client status, or is that something where, since I have you on the phone now, we can sort of discuss why the fee is what it is?
um, I think it probably does put them in that category, but since I have you on the phone, you can definitely start talking about what's involved and what they get for that and why, that's probably what they're going to have to pay anyway. Or maybe, it's an opportunity to negotiate, definitely. In fact, today I was talking to someone about a fee, and I could have very easily just emailed the number to them,
Hmm.
but I never do that unless I'm pressed because I want to be able to gauge their response and I want to be able to also, hear if they fall off their chair, if you will. And I want to be able to add, if I feel it's necessary, something like, and if that's too much, then we can adjust the scope of the project and adjust the fee if necessary. I don't want to always say that because it may not be necessary, but I want to be able to hear if it's going to help my cause.
Do you think that there is a place to publish pricing on your website, for example? So, you deal with a lot of graphic designers, for example. Should there be kind of an a la carte price listed for a business card? Or I often see walking around New York like headshots for $100 for actors, etc. At the lower end of the range, is that kind of the clientele that kind of expects to know without talking to you what the price is? And are you saying that we should try to avoid those clients?
It's a little tricky sometimes. I think I am a big fan actually of putting pricing on
Hmm.
websites, general price ranges, because that will weed out the people who are the amateurs. And the people who want to be weeding out the amateurs are generally the ones who are already pretty busy and don't have time to talk to them.
Right.
If that's the situation you're in, then definitely put price ranges on your website. And I've been working with a lot of my clients lately actually about creating price packages, packaged pricing for the typical things that people come to them for,
Hmm.
and then you can adjust them or tailor them to someone's specific needs. But I think it really helps to have an outline of services or a package just in terms of a talking point so that people understand what they're getting.
At what point in this process do you get to the point where you're drafting a proposal for the client?
I only recommend doing a proposal when, number one, you've already talked about the money, Whenever possible, you have gotten from them an okay that yes, we have $5,000 for this, and I will put a proposal together so that you can know what you get for that. I want them to sign off on the number so that basically the proposal is just a way to put in writing the specifics of what we've just agreed to.
And you know, I was at a panel discussion 2 weeks ago, and the topic came up about estimates versus formal proposals. And how an estimate was originally, you know, the photographer's way to say, I think it's going to cost about this, and that was sort of almost like the price range. And then once you were selected, or maybe when you get to the final three, then maybe you actually draft a proposal with more itemized specifics. But how more and more people are just assuming that the estimate is the final proposal.
Yeah, I think, you know, we want to save ourselves as much time as possible, and drafting a formal proposal when it's not necessary is definitely a waste of time. And so I think it does depend on your relationship with the client. And also who else is involved in making the decision. Because if once you have given the estimate, even in a simple email or maybe a one-pager, and then they're going to take it to a committee or to a board or to a meeting, then that their experience of you is not going to translate very well unless they're ready to sell you, and sometimes they are, in which case it becomes much more important to draft a formal proposal and basically have that speak for you, and whenever possible be able to present it yourself. But you know, in the absence of that, then you know, this is a selling tool essentially.
And I assume, you know, you've been in the mentoring business for a while. You have a number of templates that you can kind of just go to rather than reinventing the wheel every time.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind a little plug, I also have pulled together actual examples of proposals. I have one called the Designer's Proposal Bundle and another called the Copywriter's Proposal Bundle, and I would like to put one together for photographers, actually. But they are templates and models because, you know, you never really think about it, but most creative professionals don't have opportunities to see other people's proposals.
Right. The last bullet point here is an interesting one because to me it kind of speaks about really defining scope properly. Consider charging per project rather than per hour. Something that I've heard a lot is, you know, where the photographer will do the shoot, whether it's a corporate headshot shoot or advertising shoot or whatnot, spend some time doing retouching and send it to the client, and the client comes back and says, yeah, I don't really like the way the retouching looks. Can you do it again? And in that case, it sounds a little bit like scope creep, and the photographer oftentimes is in an awkward position of saying, well, you know, that's additional hours, and even though we did it per project, I'm going to have to charge you additional hours. So what's the general approach that you have?
My approach is definitely charging per project, but that presumes that you know how long things take, and you know how long your client is also going to add to that part of the process. There was a reference on the slide before to an aggravation factor, and that's sometimes where it comes in here, where you just add, you know, 10%, for example, to your project fee because you know you're going to have to hold their hand a lot.
Right.
But the other thing is that per project, you also have to outline how many revisions, so rounds of retouching in this case, would be included in that. And maybe you even ask them how many they want you to include so that it is part of the package price. And then it's stated in your proposal or your contract or whatever the agreement is that anything over and above that first one or that second one is additional, and it's on a per hour basis.
That sounds like good advice to sort of put the onus on the client to think about that aspect of the project. To say, I usually include 2 rounds of retouching, but how many rounds would you like? Yeah, I love negotiation and talking price. Now, this is another thing. Negotiation, you know, there's obviously a lot of books on negotiation, and the one thing that I've sort of realized about negotiation is nobody's really good at negotiation kind of out of the womb. And it feels like you have to really practice negotiating, and, you know, a good place to practice is, you know, when you walk out on the street and you go to, you know, the guy selling fruit on the side. of the street. And there's so many opportunities to practice negotiation, and I don't think people do it enough. And then they get into these, thousands of dollar contracts potentially, and they're kind of frozen and don't know how to approach it.
And the last point there actually I think is the most important one, so I want to start with that, which is that in order to negotiate well, you have to be ready to walk away.
Yeah.
You really must be so detached, so not needing it, that you can ask for what you deserve and be in a position to go back and forth. And I think the negotiating also positions you as a professional, because people expect professionals not to just take the first thing that they suggest or the first thing that's put on the table. And it means you respect yourself, you respect your work, you are willing to do what's necessary to get what you deserve. And so few creatives even want to have the conversation in the first place, as we said, much less do the back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of my work behind the scenes is actually kind of coaching someone on each step of the process, and I can often hear the reluctance, like, oh no, do I have to go back again? They already said yes to that. Do I have to go back again? I'm like, yes, you do.
Can you give us some examples of where you or people that you've been consulting have walked away from the negotiation because of the terms are too onerous?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I'm thinking of one client in particular from a couple of weeks ago who, this is a graphic designer who is focused on law firms and legal marketing. And she had been doing a lot of networking and had gotten some good prospects, and she was very excited because finally the one prospect she was really interested in came and said, okay, we want you to do a newsletter. And she was all excited, and we were talking about what she would charge, and I said, well, you have to ask first for their budget so you don't invest too much before you find out whether or not it's a good fit. And she was like, oh, no, I'll just put my numbers together. But when she did ask for the budget, they wanted to spend $500.
Mm-hmm.
And she was going to charge $3,000 essentially. And she really didn't want to have to walk away, but she had to, because when you set a precedent like that, then they expect you to always be that cheap. And she really wanted a long-term relationship with this client. And I coached her through what language to use, and she basically said something like, if I were going to quote this, here's what I would quote, and here's what would be involved. Here are all the elements. And she didn't even go through the time of putting together a proposal because it wasn't worth her time.
Mm-hmm.
But she explained what was involved, and I can't afford to do it for the $500 that you're offering. I'm very sorry. And I hope that in the future we will have another opportunity to work on something.
Right. Yeah, taking the high road.
It's really important.
So these contractual points, can you walk us through these sub points here?
Yes, and again, the first thing I would say is that you must do this every single time. You may not have to do a formal contract every single time, but you must have an agreement and the details in writing, especially in those situations where you find yourself saying to yourself, oh, I don't need to do it this time, and making an exception. Those are the situations where people get into the most trouble, I find.
How important is it to engage a lawyer when you're kind of putting together your proposal or your terms and conditions?
I think that you might, if there is no good standard contract for the type of work that you do, and I would think that in the photography realm, some of the trade associations offer that.
Mm-hmm.
So from that point of view, you probably don't need to engage a lawyer, but you want someone with the authority and the knowledge to make sure that the contract you're using is not just something that you found on the internet and tweaked for yourself. You want to make sure that it covers the things that you don't even know you don't know.
Right.
But from there, I actually have clients who are creating like an umbrella contract for each client relationship, and then for each project, there's just a simple agreement that outlines some of these points, the most important points, like, all right, what's the fee, and when is the when is the deadline, and how many rounds of retouching, and just the main things. And that can be done very simply in 5 minutes.
Hmm. The payment terms is something that I hear frequently. Photographers who do editorial work for magazines, for example, the large publishing houses like the Condé Nast and the Time Inks of the world are kind of notorious for, taking 90 days to pay the photographer. What's generally your payment terms, and how do you deal with people that sort of exceed those terms?
So, um, my advice is to always get a deposit up front, number one, whether it's half up front or a third up front, but usually no less. And, that may often be more difficult with a big corporation because they just don't work that way.
Hmm.
But I think it's really important to ask for it and to push for it whenever possible. And sometimes being able to take a credit card as a payment will make it more possible.
And the cancellation, because I've dealt with this kind of personally in the past. Do
Mhm.
you have cancellation terms specifically saying X% of the project fee is due when a cancellation occurs, and how difficult is it to kind of collect on that?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, the deposit can also serve as the kill fee,
Hmm.
so that if the project is canceled before it's complete, then at least you have, something in hand, and hopefully it's half. And again, it always depends on your relationship with the client if you can collect on it, but hopefully, you've weeded out the bad clients and you're working with people you have strong or are developing strong relationships with, and maybe they're not paying. Actually, on one of the groups I'm in on Facebook, there was someone yesterday talking about not being paid by one of her clients because they were having trouble getting payment by one of their distributors or something like that, and people were giving her advice. And it's usually what works is talk to them like real people, find out what the problem is, harass them, because it's the person who really stays on top of it that's actually going to get
Hmm.
paid. And I'm not a big fan of taking people to small claims court. I think that that is a waste of time, but it depends on how large the project is and how much money you're owed. But I just think that there's a lot we can do before we get there to avoid and prevent that type of situation. And it has to do with a lot of what we are talking about at the beginning, talking about money, making sure everything's clear, not making exceptions, not because they need it immediately, throwing your own process out the window.
I know we started with negotiation, but I also want to finish this slide with negotiation just because there's so many things to talk about in regards to that topic.
Hmm.
And one of the, kind of a real life situation when you're a little bit off, and let's say you want to bid 3,000 and the client says I have 2,500. A lot of
Hmm.
negotiation strategies say kind of expand what you're talking about. So maybe it's not just the money. Maybe there's contractually an agreement that the vendor will use you again for future work, or maybe there's some other thing that they can offer in exchange, barter of services, etc. Can you talk about some negotiation strategies that you're advising clients on?
Yeah, definitely, because I do think it's not always about the money. And that if you think about it, there's probably a lot that a client has to offer that you could benefit from, maybe even more than the money.
Hmm.
So, one of the main things I like to think about is exposure. Who else do they know that they could introduce you to? Who else will see this work? Where can you get credit for it? What kind of online exposure can you get? Is there some kind of publicity? Can you get access to a list of people? I mean, there's just so much that you could ask for, but you have to be willing to ask.
Social media is obviously kind of the brave new world in the past few years, and backlinking to websites and putting them on Facebook, etc. Do you think that that's a valid exchange as a part of the negotiation process?
Yes, sometimes, depending on, how many followers they have or how many friends or who would see it.
Hmm.
But yes, I think that can be something of value to negotiate for, definitely. What do you think?
I, I, I have sort of mixed feelings about that because, again, I think it's a matter of reach. And I think
Hmm.
that too often people will use the crediting, which is sort of internet currency now, as
Hmm.
payment. And so I think if it's an add-on to actual payment, that's fine, but it should never completely replace
Right.
the payment.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Closing the deal with confidence. I like this. Don't wait in silence. Keep asking questions. Seems
Hmm.
pretty key to keep the lines of communication open and be try to be as transparent as possible.
I think the underlying idea here is also that the ball is never in their court. It is always in your court. Because in this process where there is an actual project on the table and perhaps you're waiting for them to make a decision and you think, well, they're going to get back to me, right?
Hmm.
Because then I will know if I got it or not. But the ball is not in their court. Even at that point, if you really need to know what is your next step, even if your next step means asking them when they're making their decision, or when you can follow up, or when the next step is going to be. So I think that it gets very easy to, as I say here, wait in silence and just assume that they're going to take the next action because that's the thing. We have no idea what's going on the other end, and it's so easy to make stories up in our head
Hmm.
about, oh, well, I didn't hear from them, so they must have chosen someone else, or they didn't like what I sent them, or the price was too high, or, all different things. And the only way to know what's really happening is to reach out and do whatever your next step is. And I know that sometimes people feel reluctant because they suddenly assume they're going to be perceived as a stalker.
Yeah.
But to me, stalking, number one, people never even get close to being a stalker because they're so afraid of it. And truthfully, that's marketing. They expect you, if you're serious, if you really want it, to come get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think it's appropriate for a photographer to ask, uh, who else is bidding on the project? How many people are you trying to select from? Or is that kind of crossing the line too much?
No, I think you should ask. I think you need to know because that's what's going to help you decide how much time to invest. And they're not always going to tell you,
Hmm.
but I think there are ways to ask that, and maybe even ways to explain why it would be important information for you to have that might encourage them to give you the answers, or if not, nothing lost.
So outside of the budget and outside of kind of asking who else might be bidding on the project, is there a set of questions you think are sort of fundamental in that opening conversation that photographers and creatives should be having with their clients?
Yes, there's a very long list actually, which is in the proposal bundles. But off the top of my head, I think that who's making the decision is something you want to know,
Uh-huh.
and when. Um, you want to know as much as you can about their challenges with the project, what their objectives are, so that you can do your best job helping them solve their problem or meet their goals. So I think even going beyond the photography or the graphic design or the copywriting, you can be asking questions that show that you've done this before, you know what you're doing. That's the thing about questions, actually. It's to gather information, but it's also to position yourself as the professional who knows exactly what they're doing. And the questions usually can serve that purpose to show that you know, but also to point out the things they don't know because they're not the photographer.
Right. Do you think that if you ask the question, who's making the decision, and the person who you're talking to is not the decision maker, that the photographer should try to get to the decision maker?
You mean to have contact with the decision
Yeah,
maker?
only because I've heard situations where, it seems like you have an advocate within that organization. It seems like you're about to get hired, and then it gets scuttled at the end
Right,
because you were kind of an unknown quantity to the person who was actually making the decision. And a lot of time
right.
could actually, have gone into that process up to that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I think it doesn't hurt to ask. I really don't think there are a lot of questions you should not ask
Hmm.
if asked appropriately. And in this case, I think one should offer, it's not so much about asking if you can have access to that person, but making the argument for why you presenting directly what you have to offer to that person would be better for everyone,
Hmm.
and maybe even take the burden off of the person who is supposedly your advocate.
Something that I've also heard very often, particularly with creatives who are generating intellectual property as a part of the creative process, that oftentimes the client doesn't understand the licensing aspect of it. So photographers
Right.
usually have a fee, a shoot fee or a creative fee. And then another part of it is, oh, you want to use this on your website
Usage.
for a year, or you want to use it on a billboard for a year. And where should that come in the negotiation process, and how do you negotiate it when they say, I don't know what you're talking about?
Right. So this is the type of thing that I think, number one, you have to assess whether the client is an amateur versus a professional, and the professionals understand usage and licensing, and the amateurs clearly do not.
Right, right.
And then once you have determined who you're talking to, you have to choose how you're going to explain it to them. And I do think that earlier rather than later. So if you're talking about money in the very first conversation, then you have to make it clear that, for example, there's a fee, and the fee is between this range and that range. And then depending on how you use it, there's going to be usage charges. And all of that is up for negotiation.
Right. Um,
And you can say that.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Proposing the next steps after everyone signs the deal, even if they haven't yet. Uh, Again, is this sort of like a show of I know what I'm doing and let me drive the bus?
Yes. Yes, because they may not know what the next step
Hmm.
is. I mean, usually it's something as simple as you let me know that you're ready and I will send you my agreement. Or, I'll send you an invoice and you can pay the deposit. But it's just a little technique to kind of help bridge that gap.
Are you suggesting to your the people that you're helping to use any sort of electronic project management with their clients, like a Basecamp, or there's so many different things that people are using online to sort of monitor the project?
hmm Most of the people I work with use Basecamp.
Hmm.
And it seems to work really well as long as you can get your clients to participate. I know that's sometimes a problem.
Right.
And sometimes I think it's using one of those tools complicates things. Sometimes maybe it isn't, it can just be simpler.
Right.
And then you just have to decide based on the complexity of the project.
And we talked about the advance. Let's talk about the tactfully giving a deadline to the client. Have you ever been in a situation where you say an additional fee will be assessed if the deadline isn't met on your side as the customer?
This technique has more to do with this price is good for this long.
Ah, gotcha.
Right? So if you and we're just trying to kind of nudge people to make a decision so that we can control our cash flow and our workflow. So, today is February whatever, and this fee is good for 30 days, and or 60 days, or whatever you
Hmm.
decide. And from there, if you're not ready by then we will requote it for you.
Gotcha.
That's the idea.
Making sure you get paid. And I also want to ask you, since we talked about Basecamp a little bit, uh, are you are you suggesting to customers that they also use sort of online accounting systems to dispatch invoices, etc.? I know that there are products out there like FreshBooks, for example, where you can dispatch an email invoice and it'll tell you whether the client has opened it or not.
Right. Yeah, I think those tools are great, and almost everyone I know loves FreshBooks, so definitely a plug for them.
Hmm.
Um, the only possible problem I see with that type of invoicing is that it's done via email, and email messages get lost in the barrage of
Yeah.
them. And so I think a conversation has to be had with the client about how they like to be invoiced and what's the most efficient for their process. And I think sometimes sending an invoice on paper, something tangible that they can pass along to the accounting department, can be helpful, as long as it's clearly a duplicate and not another invoice.
You touched upon it earlier, and you said it's rarely worth the time to take someone who hasn't paid to small claims court.
Hmm.
There are obviously other remedies like a collection service and whatnot. Can you tell us about, again, some specific instances of how you treated people who were really late with payment?
Yes. One of the techniques that I have seen work the best, and this is assuming that we're not talking about malicious people who never intend to pay you,
Right.
but people who are just struggling and having a problem and trying to keep their own head above water. But getting a lawyer to write a letter is very effective.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary, to the client.
Right.
And so that's what I would do if after, 90 days plus, you can't even get them on the phone. But before that, I think you have to really try hard to, kind of make the case as a human being for why you need to be paid.
And how often are you putting in late fees into the payment schedule?
See, I think you have to have a system in place for that, and it has to be part of your contract also that you say if you don't pay at 60 days, then this fee is assessed, or if you don't pay at 90 days, this fee is assessed.
Hmm.
And then if they don't pay, then you stick to it. But you can't, this woman on Facebook yesterday was trying to add, late fees after the fact, and I really don't think that's right.
Right. Um, so talking about the kind of the soft science of deal making, etc. I've heard from wedding photographers. This is the position of progressive wedding photographers, which is I'm not selling photography services. I'm selling a relationship because I'm going to be spending 12 hours on the most intimate day with this couple. I've heard from photo editors who said, all things being equal, where this photographer is very technically skilled and this photographer is technically skilled, I'm going to pick the person I like better because I
Hmm.
might have to spend a lot of time with them. How important is uh, building kind of social skills and relationship management to being a successful marketer and business person?
Extremely important, especially now that so much of the contact happens online.
Hmm.
I think one of the ways to stand out is by, making sure that people understand what kind of person you are, doing in-person networking, taking clients out to lunch, bringing your portfolio or your portfolio on your iPad or however you have it. But I think a lot of attention should be paid to nurturing and developing the relationships with the actual people, because I do think that's how they decide who they're going to work with. And I think also how you work is sometimes more important than the work that you produce for the reasons that you said. And I just think it's really something that people don't put enough emphasis
Hmm.
on. And I think, the other aspect of it is ongoing communication through the process. So even once you've got the job, making sure to set the expectations properly, to keep your clients up to date on where you are in the process, and if something is running late, then, don't let them be the one to ask where it is. You always anticipate and give them a little update. I mean, that kind of communication speaks volumes about one's professionalism.
You've been the marketing mentor and been dealing with marketing for many years. And given the rise of the internet and all the different channels for marketing, are you still surprised at the power that word of mouth has as sort of a part of the overall marketing package that any creative should have?
I do think it's more important than ever, actually, word of mouth, because with all of the resources that we can find at our fingertips in an instant online, we still have very little way of really knowing how to suss out the ones that are going to be right for
Hmm.
us. And, now everyone is a marketer. So, and everyone is selling something. So, having a person or a friend or someone's name even to drop, I think carries a lot of weight. And so, if in your marketing, for example, you can make connections with people through LinkedIn by referencing someone that you know mutually, not even through their complicated process, just by saying, oh, I see that you know this person and so do I, so maybe we should connect.
Do you spend kind of time on a weekly or a monthly basis going through the who do you know kind of 6 degrees of separation on LinkedIn or Facebook?
I, at least once a week, will just make it a point to spend a half an hour inviting people to connect with me or seeing what people are doing. I mean, that's part of my marketing
Hmm.
because if people are making changes to their LinkedIn profile, for example, they could also be doing other marketing things that they may need help with.
Right.
Like those are the types of things I know to watch for. So each of us, depending on what you're doing, has to figure out where are your prospects and how will you know when they are near their moment of need or wanting to pass your name along to someone else? But yes, I mean those types of activities we definitely need to make time for. And it's funny because I think a lot of people get confused about the online marketing because Facebook and some of the other social media suck you in and it's addictive and it makes you feel like you're not being productive, but some of it actually is very productive from a marketing point of view and
Hmm.
you have to know the difference.
Have you found any particular service to be more fertile channel for your own marketing purposes? I've always been sort of not impressed with LinkedIn because I feel like it's really a service for headhunters to find, senior level people to place them in other places. Whereas I've gotten jobs off of Facebook. What have you kind of seen in the social media realm?
I am actually a huge fan of LinkedIn because the focus of it is
Hmm.
business. And because it's not even so much about getting jobs off of LinkedIn, although I think a lot of people do use LinkedIn as a search engine, so it's possible. But there are two ways that I think LinkedIn is much more effective than something like Facebook, which is that you can actually research your prospects based on the groups that they participate
Hmm.
in. Even if they're not participating in the groups, all of the members of a particular group, so, pharmaceutical marketing communicators or, the IABC or some other group, all of those are your prospects. You could just find a prospect list there.
And when you enter a group discussion, whether it's on LinkedIn or somewhere else, how do you personally kind of establish your credibility before you feel like you can start quote marketing more directly to them?
Well, I don't think it's appropriate actually to do marketing directly through the groups, but to use the members of the group as someone that you then connect with or invite to connect because you saw them in the group or you saw that they commented on something. And really, it's just about contributing something useful to the conversation and responding or initiating a conversation. If you don't see something relevant to you in your work, you can initiate a conversation and see if other people respond. But for the most part, all of this content marketing and the social media, to me, you do have to be a little bit more subtle. What is there, like an 80-20 rule?
Right.
80% you give and 20%, you can promote yourself a little bit more blatantly.
As kind of a final talking point, I often get the question of I'm charging a certain rate for these services and I want to move up to the next level. I charged 3,000 for a wedding and I want to get to 5,000, or I shoot $500 headshots and I want to shoot $1,000 headshots. How do you how do you instruct your clients to go about price increases in a way that's palatable to their clients, and or does it necessitate a changing of audience to be able to do that?
Yeah, the latter, I think. I mean, especially the kinds of changes you're talking about there. I don't think that it's possible for the most part, unless you do it very gradually and it's part of your relationship with the client. But, if you want to charge 5,000 instead of 3,000, I think you're going to have to find new
Yeah,
prospects.
yeah. And how often do you, for example, increase your rates? Is that an annual thing for you?
No, it's not annual. And in fact, this past year, these last couple of years, because everyone's been having such a hard time,
Hmm.
I have gotten much more flexible. And frankly, I say to people, here's my normal hourly rate, here's how I work. But if you can't afford that, tell me what you can afford. And I want to start with them where they can afford it and then help them grow
Hmm.
and increase the rate as we go along.
And that's worked effectively for you?
It has. It's kept more people in the circle than, left them at the door.
And I guess that's partially kind of expectation setting because you're being clear up front to say this is my normal rate, but
Hmm.
but I'm helping you out because I want you to help me
Hmm.
out in the future.
Hmm.
Marketing
And I think
genius,
people
Elise.
appreciate. I think people appreciate it, Alan.
Right, right. No, for sure.
You know.
So Elise, tell us about here's the 20% where you get to pitch yourself a little bit because I know you
Okay.
have a lot of material. So take us through all of the different resources you have.
Sure. So we've been talking mostly about material that came from my most recent book, which is called The Creative Professional's Guide to Money. And there's actually a website with lots of resources and information online called creativeguidetommoney.com, and you can go there. And it's also available on Amazon. And then I do offer consulting and coaching, and I do a free half-hour session. So you can find a link to that at marketing-mentor.com and sign up for that. And then I also put out marketing tips every 2 weeks. So you can get that. That's my free newsletter at marketing-mentortips.com. Actually, I don't think that's there. You can go to the online store where I sell the proposal bundles that I was talking about, plus all sorts of other types of kits and useful, I call them tools. It's not so much books, it's downloadable, like an online marketing plan that will basically tell you exactly what to do every day. That kind of thing is at the marketing-mentor-toolbox.com. I also am the lead author and editor on two blogs. One is my marketingmixblog.com, and the other is the Creative Freelancer blog. That's part of the conference, the Creative Freelancer Conference. And then one of the most popular things, apparently, I didn't know it because I didn't look at the analytics until recently, is the podcast series that I do. I have 200 podcast episodes up
Wow.
there, and I do one pretty much every week, and just interviewing clients on their success stories, what's working for them. And I just find that people really want to hear what's working for other people. So there's a bunch of those up there, and then you can find me on Twitter at mmtoolbox. And then their Facebook is marketingmentortoolbox.com.
You know, you like us over at PhotoShelter, content marketing is such a big part of your own marketing
Yeah.
plan. But we're obviously in very different businesses than somebody who's a graphic designer or a photographer. How important do you think content marketing is to these individual creatives? Is it something they should be doing, or are there better marketing things that they should be doing with their time?
I do think more and more people have to do content marketing, and it basically turns all of us into publishers, which is not normal for a lot of
Yeah.
people. But I am helping the different clients I have, no matter what their their service is, figure out what is the content that is most relevant to their market. That's the tricky part. That's why people can't figure out what to write about or talk about, is because they don't know yet who they're talking to, or they haven't made a commitment to who they're talking to. And that's a really important aspect. But I think, whether it's blogging or disseminating other people's material, or one thing I've been talking about recently is like a retweeting strategy, where you don't really have to come up with your own tweets at all. You just find the tweets that are relevant
Hmm.
to your market and you pass it along to them.
Smart. Why do all the work, right?
Right?
I love
That
it.
works for me.
I could talk about marketing forever just because I think it's such a fascinating discipline, and I love sort of the fact that it's a well-studied thing, and we have analytics now where we didn't have analytics, 20 years ago. And so photographers, Elise is a real well of information. Encourage you to check out her website and also the creativefreelancerconference.com. Elise, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure as always.
Thank you, Alan. It's been great chatting with you.
Everyone, join us again. You can always find out about our new webinars at photoshelter.com/about/webinar. We have some great things coming up. And as I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, our Jumpstart contest at photoshelter.com/jumpstart, $15,000 worth of prizes and a lot of consulting time with some great people like Ilise. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We'll see you again online. Take care.